starts with Ram Mohan Roy as the founding politicized India's education. So Lord Macaulay's notorious speech in Parliament, which all of us quote, comes 12 years after Ram Mohan Roy writes this letter to the Prime Minister asking that Sanskrit, that Hinduism, modern Hinduism, is a recent and a fake construct. It's a gold mine of knowledge in the Shastra. Respect for those who respect the Dharma starts in the 1800s, and universities in Germany, France, Britain, they start introducing the rise of Sanskrit in Europe, corresponding to the decline of Sanskrit. It's a huge story that
Macaulay, a lot for our desanskritizing of India. So I guess he,
upper caste, all those men of talents and learning, educated. Sanskrit, in fact, is a source of knowledge which the Westerners took. A whole lot of knowledge. Education would be best to keep this country in place with an anglicized education. He is the one who started this whole campaign in England. He can help us. We are not civilized. Hinduism with his own hotchpotch, what we call khichdi, really negotiating within the framework of the Eastern Hinduism were mixed up. I don't think he understood Hinduism very well because he was against Murti Puja.
Rajiv, there is a cultural revolution going on, awakening going on, and as part of that there is a debate on Twitter and social media platform. One particular debate is on the topic of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. I know you've done some work on it, so I wanted to first ask you when and what made you interested in Raja Ram Mohan Roy?
Good point. My book Indra's Net refutes the Western Indology thesis on what they call Neo-Hinduism, by which they mean that Hinduism, modern Hinduism, is a recent and a fake construct. It's an artificial construct made up in the last 200 years, not connected with Vedas. And the allegation is that, the nationalists, starting in Bengal and other places, wanted to kind of create a national religion for India. And they took a lot of ideas from Christianity and they put it in Sanskrit and came up with mixed it with a few old Vedic ideas, and that became Hinduism, so they call it Neo-Hinduism. So I wanted to refute that, and I believe that first you have to study the opposing side. So I went and read a lot of their articles and papers and books and all that. They've written lots on Neo-Hinduism, and it always starts with Ram Mohan Roy as the founding father of this Neo-Hinduism. They felt that he's the one who created these ideas in the first place. So this is how my interest in Ram Mohan Roy started. Now, once I started looking at him, I realized that he was an employee of the East India Company. Ram Mohan Roy was an employee of the East India Company. In Calcutta. This is a very interesting thing. And he worked on both sides. He was patriotic. He loved his culture. He was certainly a very proud Bengali. His ideas on Hinduism were mixed up. I don't think he understood Hinduism very well because he was against Murti Puja. The Christians couldn't stand idolatry, so he went along with that. On certain things he was good. He did some good work also. But he was primarily negotiating within the framework of the East India Company rule, not fighting that we should get rid of them, but within the scope and umbrella of the East India Company rule over India, he was negotiating that Indians should get a better deal. So he was sort of the Indian working within the colonial camp, trying to get them a better deal. So he was working on both sides, and you have to give him credit for a lot of good things he also did. He was a close collaborator of William Carey, a very notorious Baptist evangelist who started the Serampore seminary and known for all his Hindu phobia. And in many occasions and multiple times in his life, he collaborated with him. And Roy eventually moved to England, and that's where he died, and that's where he was buried. In fact, at the coronation of the British ruler, he was invited to sit along with heads of state and ambassadors of various countries. He was given that stature even though he was not. He was a private citizen working for the East India Company. But the British really liked him, and he converted to the Unitarian Church, and they considered him a major catch because here is this guy, upper caste, very well spoken, knows different languages, can speak he can speak all kind of he can wear the identity of speaking in behalf of Sufis or behalf of Vedantins or Christians. He could swing here and there. So he was an interesting person to study, and the allegation is that he started Hinduism with his own hotchpotch, what we call khichdi, a mixture. He started this thing, what today we would say is a muddled up sameness idea. He started that, and they say that this is the origin of modern Hinduism. So I was very interested in understanding this. But what troubled me about him is that he is the source of this idea that Sanskrit should be replaced with an Anglicized education system. And he is the one who started this whole campaign in England to convince them that they should desanskritize India's education.
But why did he focus on Sanskrit per se?
Interestingly, he writes a letter to the Governor General of India in 1823.
Okay.
And it's a very interesting letter in which he argues why keeping Sanskrit is a bad thing. The natives will remain in darkness. It doesn't have rationality and logic. It doesn't have science. And things like he mentioned Vyakaran and the problems of nitpicking grammar and all that is no use. He mentions Nyaya, that is of no use to people. He talks about Vedanta. So he talks about various aspects, some kind of name dropping buzzwords. I'm not sure how much he really understood those, because if he understood those, he would not feel this way.
Okay.
So he argues, and I want to quote from his letter. This is kind of, I'm taking the conclusion of his letter. His conclusion is this: the Sanskrit system of education would be best to keep this country in darkness, if such had been the policy of the British legislature. But as the improvement of the native population is the object of the British government, it ought to promote a more liberal and enlightened system of instruction, embracing mathematics, natural philosophy, chemistry, and anatomy, with other useful sciences which may be accomplished by employing a few gentlemen of talents and learning educated in Europe.
Okay.
Okay. In representing this subject to your lordship, I conceive myself discharging a solemn duty which I owe to my countrymen. I'm doing it on behalf of our fellow Indians. And also to that enlightened sovereign, which is the King of England, and legislature, the Parliament, which have extended their benevolent cares to this distant land, actuated by a desire to improve its inhabitants.
Oh, okay.
So this is so typical. He is the prototype brown sahib. I mean, this is the typical sucking up to these guys. I'm so grateful. Come and help us. We are not civilized. You please help us out and all that. And the British have been talking all these things, but now for the first time is a very powerful, eminent, highly regarded, gentleman from India, learned fellow Brahmin, upper caste, all those, an elite selling out.
Right.
So he starts a whole new trend in the colonial enterprise.
So we've been blaming Macaulay, a lot for our desanskritizing of India. So I guess he plays a big role too.
So Lord Macaulay's notorious speech in Parliament, which all of us quote, comes 12 years after Ram Mohan Roy writes this letter to the Prime Minister asking that Sanskrit be replaced with English education.
Interesting.
Okay, so it's a great gift to somebody like Macaulay. He's having a ball. He's saying, okay, now one of those guys wants it, so why no? We should give it to them. We should help them out. That kind of thing. And the sad thing is, Sanjeev Sanyal, whom I think is a good guy otherwise, but misinformed on certain matters. In his book, he actually supports this idea and argues that the reason this great Indian civilization at one time collapsed is because of Sanskrit. Right. Because Sanskrit is very rigid, doesn't promote freedom. You cannot use
the same nitpicking grammar.
Same nitpicking. This grammar is too rigorous. You need freedom. You need to get out of this. And so the rise of the civilization, the Renaissance, depends on English and importing English ways, British ways.
Okay. Now I want to follow up and ask you. So how did this desanskritizing of India begin? And you mentioned Sanjeev Sanyal briefly, and what is the legacy of this? I'm assuming, is there a Bengali legacy to it, where Bengalis are rejecting it more? What's the legacy of this?
Well, the British Empire was headquartered in Calcutta, in Dhaka, the whole Bengal area. So obviously that's where the influence was the greatest. And then it goes to your hometown of, Madras, and they get the Madras presidency. So, Punjabis also sell out later, also sell out. I mean, we all have this, we should not be ethnically, I'm this Bengali first or I'm this Punjabi first and all that. Let me tell you, since you raised this issue of, Bengal, let me tell you this. I have tremendous respect for Bengalis like Ramakrishna, Vivekanand, Aurobindo, Sri Prabhupada, Rupa Goswami and his nephew Jiva Goswami. Brilliant. And I have spent more time quoting these people, working on them, writing with them. I have excellent relations with these lineages. So it's not about a Bengali, non-Bengali. It's just that, you have to look at each person and their stand. I mean, I love, Subhash Chandra Bose. I was invited to give the main address by General Bakshi in Delhi at the anniversary there. So I have tremendous respect for those who respect the Dharma and the Vedic tradition. And I am able to criticize those who don't. It has nothing to do with ethnicity.
Right.
So this business that, Bengalis close ranks is kind of a shame. I, as a Punjabi, okay, I like my, aloo paratha and, chola bhatura. And once in a while I'm in the mood to do a bhangra. I'm not very good at it. But all that's okay. But I would never say Punjabi first. And I would never say that somebody who's a Punjabi must be right. I just don't, you won't see me doing that. And when I go to India, I don't go hanging around Punjab. I may have gone there 3-4 times in the last 10-15 years. But every single time I go to India, which is 4 times a year, I go to the south. I have visited the south 10 times more often than I visited Punjab. And so, I think that we should get out of this narrow-minded ethnic identity as our primary identity.
Right.
So I'll clarify what my identity is. I believe that primarily the most deepest foundation I should have, and I want to have all the time, is Vedic yajna. So my deepest quest is to be in the Vedic yajna. That's beyond borders. It's a universal thing. To implement this yajna, we need Bharat Rashtra. We need a vehicle. And Bharat Rashtra is the second part of my identity because it's a vehicle we need. And the Rashtra needs a Rajya. So the Rajya is a means to an end. The Rajya, I don't support this guy or that guy for the sake of it. I support them to the extent they're helping the Rashtra and not otherwise. And in this business of first the Vedic yajna, then the Rashtra, then the Rajya, there is no Punjabiness there. I mean, this is true. And so it troubles me when people say, oh, you are for Bengal, anti-Bengal. I don't even think that way. So that's my answer to whether the Bengalis should be blamed or not blamed. I think coincidentally, because the British landed there, the majority of the people in the early couple of centuries were Bengalis who the British got to know and traded with and so on. So that is where the proverbial brown side was born.
Okay.
And then spread across.
You talked about desanskritizing of in India, but you also mentioned in one of your tweets about the sanskritizing of Europe. So how did that happen?
So this is very interesting. In the early 1800s, while thanks to Ram Mohan Roy and Macaulay, they are desanskritizing India's education. At the same time, in parallel, major European universities are creating Sanskrit chairs. They are bringing Sanskrit into their system because they know it's a gold mine of knowledge in the Shastras. So this data mining of Shastras starts in the 1800s, and universities in Germany, France, Britain, they start introducing a lot of Sanskrit studies. And this is how a whole lot of knowledge gets transferred and turned into Western intellectual property. And I'm writing several books on the origins of a lot of the Western thought, a lot of Western thought. Actually, it goes back even further, but it got a big boost at that time. Because prior to then, they were taking knowledge like botany, and they were taking the actual empirical data on botany and trying to make it into their own. But the Sanskrit texts were not very accessible to them. But in this era, from 1800 onwards, the rise of Sanskrit in Europe, corresponding to the decline of Sanskrit in India, was it's a huge story that needs to be told, and I'm writing multiple volumes of that.
Now, do you think India could have become scientific and modern with Sanskrit? If they hadn't desanskritized India, do you think we would have still been, a modern nation?
So that's an important question, because a lot of the people criticizing me are saying that, okay, Ram Mohan Roy was right because, otherwise we could not have become scientific. But let me tell you, Ram Mohan Roy wrote this in 1823. Almost 150 years later, we got independence. So it's not as if it produced some immediate result. And during that period, the British didn't help us become very scientific. It's only after independence. So this business of sacrificing Sanskrit and in order to get English didn't really do that job. But look at Japan, which is very scientific. Look at China, which is in Mandarin, very scientific. They did not give up their native tradition, native language in order to anglicize for the sake of becoming scientific. Now, these civilizations also were lagging behind Europe in science. Japan and China were not on par with Europe as far as science is concerned, just like India wasn't, okay? But their rise to scientific prominence today was not based on becoming anglicized. So you cannot say that becoming anglicized is a necessary condition for becoming scientific. I think that thesis is false. Ram Mohan Roy was false, Macaulay was false, Sanjeev Sanyal is false, many other people who are saying this are false. Sanskrit, in fact, is a source of knowledge which the Westerners took, a whole lot of knowledge on many different areas. And Sanskrit is still not properly mined for its Vedic scientific knowledge.
Okay. So Rajiv, you also mentioned about Bengal and Madras presidency. Was there a Raja Ram Mohan Roy of the Madras presidency? The British, did they also play havoc in the Madras presidency to de-Sanskritize the Tamil mind?
You should answer that. I mean, I haven't done as much work on the Tamil. You see, it's very interesting. The identity crisis in Bengal of am I Indian first or am I Bengali first, and the one in Tamil Nadu, am I Tamilian first or am I Indian first, both need to be studied. Both need to be studied. There is as a Punjabi, I can just bring in an analog. Punjab was partitioned into the western side, which is about 60% of the land, went to Pakistan in 1947, and a smaller piece of land came to India because of Muslim-Hindu divide that the British did. And Bengal had been partitioned into West Bengal Hindu and East Bengal Muslim in the early 1900s by the British. So the partition of Bengal and the partition of Punjab are both for Hindu-Muslim reasons, both done by the British. But the one in Bengal was done much earlier. So you would have thought that the Bengalis' separation from the Muslim side would have happened more completely than the Punjabis. But in Punjab, there is no movement that says, those guys across the border are bhais because they're Punjabis, and we all eat, makki roti and saag, and we can do this bhangla together, and we speak Punjabi. So what if they're Muslims, and so what if they're Pakistanis? They're our brothers, and we'll let them smuggle in illegally across the border. There is no movement like that. I mean, Punjabi Hindus and Sikhs are very clear that we are Indians first. I mean, there is absolutely no doubt that language and ethnicity will override, patriotism. But this is somehow the case in Bengal, and I think this is a topic of Bengalis should study this, should study their own history as to why is this so, and I think Tamilians should study this about Tamil Nadu. Why is it so? Is it a British influence because those were the two states that were colonized the longest? Maybe, but I'm not sure what the reason is.
Okay, we will look forward to further research from scholars in this area. Thank you so much, Rajiv.
Thank you.
It was very enlightening,
Thank you.
as always. Namaste.
Namaste.